Rishabhanu Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhya Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Shashwin, for the wonderful Mangalacharan. Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday evening. Today, as usual, on Sundays, we have Shymanand Krishna Das Prabhuji with us. He's a very popular speaker for us, and he really guides us well, and we really look forward to his class. So thank you for joining in. Prabhuji, Danvat Pranam. Please accept our obeisances from everybody on this group. Prabhuji, we are reading the Bhagavad Gita as it is. We are on chapter 8, and today we are on text 21. Prabhuji, you kindly lead us and we will follow you. Hare Krishna.
Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna to everyone. Hope this finds everyone well. So the way I usually do this is don't like to just dive into the verse, but I want to look back in the chapter and develop a flow. So we get the context of this verse according to the verses which have gone before. This actually develops a better understanding of the flow of the verses and the text that we're studying. So that's my usual practice. So I'm going to do the same today. So mostly this chapter actually is Arjuna actually is asking some questions at the beginning of this chapter, which are related to what Krishna said at the end of the 7th chapter. There were 6 items which Krishna mentioned in the last 2 verses of the 7th chapter. They are Brahman, Adhyatma, Karma, Adibhuta, Adidaiva, and Adiyagya. 3 in the 29th verse and 3 in the 30th verse. These terms can be understood in different ways. And therefore Arjuna is asked when Krishna mentions them, describing that actually can be remembered even at the time of death by somebody who understands him as the Adibhuta, the Adiyagya, and the Adidaiva. So these questions are asked by Arjuna to clarify these terms. So that happens very quickly in the beginning of the 8th chapter. In the first 2 verses, Arjuna is asking those questions. And in the second 2 verses, Krishna is quickly describing the answers to those. Very succinct and very descriptive answers. Like the clearest one, or the one which is easiest to understand, is when Krishna says, Arjuna says, what is karma? And Krishna replies by saying it is activity which develops a body. Because that really is what karma is. When we perform something, like some karma is generated. So that means we have to acquire a new body in order to understand that. But really the essence of the chapter, what remains from the chapter from the 5th verse onwards, is in description of Arjuna's last question. Krishna said at the end of the 7th chapter, one who understands me as the governing principle of the material nature, the Lord of all the demigods, and the supreme benefactor of all yajna, that is Krishna actually. When we understand like Krishna like that, then we can attain him at the time of death. So therefore Arjuna then asked this last question, this 7th question. How can those, so your devotees, know you at the time of death? So then Krishna begins to describe 5, 6, 7. In these verses, Krishna's pointing out actually the one who remembers Krishna only at the time of his passing, he attains to Krishna's nature. Of this there is no doubt. And then in the 6th verse, Krishna goes on to explain that whatever we remember at the time of death, that state we will attain without fail. So this is 5 and 6. And then in 7, this principle continues in the 7th verse, where Krishna explains that if we can attain Krishna at the time of death by thinking of him only, then how should we think of him? So Krishna gives some clues about that in the 7th verse. He first of all says that we should think of Krishna only in his two-armed form, but we should also perform our duty because people are depending on us. There are responsibilities we have. We can't walk away from those. We can't say, look, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, you remember me only at the time of death, you'll come to me. So that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. Just remember Krishna. But that's not fair because we have responsibilities to others. And therefore Krishna says, you think of me, but you perform your duty properly like a good human being. And then in the 8th verse, having explained this, Krishna then is giving some instruction also how one who fixes his mind on Krishna, he's very easy to obtain. So these verses are very important because they give us a clue, they give us impetus for understanding, because when we get a little later in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says actually that you should always engage your mind in thinking of me, because that is the essence of all religious instruction. So in the 8th verse, Krishna says, he who meditates on me constantly, all the time, is very easy to obtain actually. His mind doesn't deviate to something else. So this is actually the goal of human life. I don't know what you think the goal of human life is. We can go out on the street with our clipboard and our pen and we can ask people, my dear sir, my dear madam, what do you think is the goal of life? But this is Krishna's statement about what is the goal of life. Because we are here in this place, which actually is not our natural environment. And the proof of that is that we're forced to accept all kinds of suffering which we don't want. So we can understand this is not really our place. We belong in the spiritual world. And therefore, throughout Bhagavad Gita, this is a principle which Krishna is trying to get us to accept. So therefore, we need to orient our life in a certain way. We're in the material world, and therefore we have responsibilities. We have to deal with the material energy. We have to do all that stuff. But at the same time, we have to think as Krishna as much as we possibly can and try and increase that all the time, so that when we're faced with our death, we won't take birth again and go through all the things that we went through, the kinds of things we went through in this lifetime, but we'll go to Krishna's lotus feet. And this is the sum and substance of the Bhagavad Gita. So therefore, in the 9th verse, Krishna gives us some clues. Because if somebody tells us, look, you must think of this thing, and we need to know how to think of it. What should we think of then? I mean, when we say Krishna, what does it mean to think of? So Krishna gives clues in the 9th verse. He says we should meditate on the Supreme Person as one who knows everything. Krishna is fully cognizant, actually. He's described like that. He knows everything about everything, actually, in this cosmic manifestation. He's the oldest because he existed before anybody else, actually, and he's eternal. He's the controller. There are different types of controllers. We all have a little bit of ability to control. And then above us, there are people like government officers. They have ability to control, which is greater than ours. And then above the government officers are the ministers of the government. They have even more ability to control. And then when we get above that, we get to the demigods. They control planetary systems and great affairs in the material nature. But above all these controllers, the supreme controller is Lord Krishna. So he is the supreme controller. Who is the controller? What's way to remember him? He's smaller than the smallest. I think I showed that picture last week of the super soul, so small, fits within the atom, like that. You see the electrons whizzing around the super soul, because the super soul is so small, it can fit into the atom. So he is the smallest. There is the maintainer of everything. Krishna is maintaining everything. We may not realize that, but he is actually. He's the creator of everything and the maintainer of everything. Without Krishna, nothing in this material world or the spiritual world can be maintained. Then he's beyond the material conception. He's described as a Joksaja. A Joksaja means one who cannot be understood by the blunt material senses. Krishna reveals himself to us on the basis of our devotion. One who's inconceivable. We can't figure Krishna out on our own, actually. We can only understand Krishna when he reveals himself to us. And he's always a person. Because we have this class of philosophers that they say no, that the Supreme is just an energy. But it's not true, because energy means there must be an energetic. Just like I've got a light before me, so that it casts some light on my face so you can see me. So what is coming from the bulb is the energies, the light and the heat. So that is the energy. So there must be an energetic. There must be a source of that heat and light. So that is the light bulb. So similarly, the different energies of the Lord, which are creating and maintaining this world, they must have an energetic. So therefore, there must be something behind that. And also from a common sense point of view, we can understand that if we see anything in this world which has got order and design, then there must be a designer and there must be a manufacturer. Like this computer that I'm talking to you through, it's such an incredible arrangement, a clever arrangement. So there must be a designer and there must be a manufacturer. I may not know who they are, but you will never convince me that this computer, if I clap my hands on the computer, there was a puff of blue smoke and this computer just appeared. If I told you that, you'd think I'm crazy, because we all know that actually behind every object, there is a designer and there's a manufacturer. So similarly, when we look at this world, we must come to the same conclusion. Such a wonderful arrangement of everything. So who is the designer? Who is the manufacturer? So that is Krishna. He's always a person. Behind everything, whether that is designed, there is a person. So similarly, behind this material manifestation, there is a person. So Krishna should always be thought of like that. He's luminous like the sun. In fact, the sun that we have in his universe is a kind of a tiny fragment of Krishna's real luminosity projected through the sun, just a tiny fragment. And he's transcendental. In other words, he's not affected by this material nature. Even when he may appear in it, he's not affected by it. It's beyond this material nature. So these are some ways that Krishna is telling us. He's saying, look, if you think of me at the time of death, because Arjuna is asking, how can the devotees know you at the time of death? So Krishna says, you just think about me. Think of me always, undeviated, and for sure you'll come to me. So because Bhagavad Gita is a compressed scripture, there's Battle of Kurukshetra to be fought. So Krishna is giving summary of main points of spiritual life. So this is one main point. So Arjuna's, he's giving some impetus to Arjuna. This is how you should think of me. But we can't spend the whole scripture on that because there are other things to describe. So the Krishna here is just giving a few points. And then when we come to 10, one at the time of death fixes his life hair between his eyebrows, and by the strength of yoga, with an undeviating mind, engages himself in remembering the Supreme in full devotion, he certainly attains the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because this chapter deals mostly with how to attain the Supreme at the time of death. Therefore, it's called Attaining the Supreme. So two classes of persons can do that. One is the devotee, and the other one is a Mishra Bhakta. He's a Bhakta, but his devotion is mixed with some other motive. So you may remember in 7th chapter, we looked at 4 kinds of personalities who sometimes start to perform devotional service. 3 of those are Mishra Bhaktas. One is the one who wants release from material distress, another one who wants monetary support, another one who's curious, he wants knowledge, and the last one who wants knowledge of the Absolute. He's not a Mishra Bhakta. He just wants knowledge of the Absolute. But at the end of the chapter, the end of the 7th chapter, Krishna describes another Mishra Bhakta. He's a Bhakta, but he wants something. He wants relief from birth, old age, disease, and death. He wants to get out of this material nature. So these verses from 10 onwards, they describe that person who can also attain the Supreme at the time of death if he leaves under the right circumstances. Krishna's going to describe that later. But here there are some summary verses about that. 11. Persons who learned in the Veda, who utter the Omkar, who are great sages in the renounced order, enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now briefly explain to you this process by which one maintains salvation. So these verses, 11, 12, and 13, they describe how that Mishra Bhakta can attain the Supreme. And then, I'm not going to read those because it'll take too much time. Now, because we describe that, this other class of person who can attain the Supreme when he leaves his body is the pure devotee, the one who is actually performing devotional service, and he has no other motive apart from to please Krishna through the performance of devotional service. So he is a pure devotee. So these are the 2 classes, the Mishra Bhakta who wants release from birth and death, and the pure devotee. So the pure devotee is described in these verses 14, 15, 16. For one who always remembers me without deviation, I'm easy to obtain, O son of Prita, because of his constant engagement in devotional service, because he's a pure devotee. His devotion is not mixed. He's not a Mishra Bhakta. His devotion is called Ananya. It is not mixed with anything. It is pure. And then 15, after attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to this material world. Krishna gives this assertion in many places in Bhagavad Gita. If you become my devotee, you think of me always, engage your mind in thinking about me always, you'll come to me for certain. And if you come to me, you won't return. And then 16, from the highest planet, because Krishna wants to make some emphasis now, you know, if we describe the spiritual like that, and this material world, what is that like? From the highest planets in material world down to the lowest, all the places of misery where repeated birth and death are taking place. But one who attains to my abode never takes birth again. So it's also an assertion for the pure devotee by comparison with the material nature. Even Lord Brahma, Krishna says it, Are Brahma Bhavana Loka, up to the topmost planet, which is the planet of Lord Brahma. It's called Satyaloka. In that planet, they live for a very long time. By our calculation, they live for 311 trillion and 40 billion years. You can take a lot of births in that time. But that is how long Brahma lives. But even when the universe comes to an end, he also dies. So the conclusion is that even up to the Brahmaloka planet, it is simply repeated birth and death, like that. That is the sum and substance of this material world. But for the pure devotee, there's none of that. If he attains to my abode, he never takes birth again. Okay, now to underline this point, Krishna talks in the verses from 17 to 22 about the nature of the material world, just to show us. Here he's saying, Brahma Bhumala Loka, up to the topmost planet in this universe, is just birth and death. Now, I don't know if you've heard this expression. Sometimes people say it. You know, when someone is trying to get you to understand things from a wider perspective, they may say, you know, you need to see the bigger picture. Sometimes we get focused on details, we don't see the bigger picture. So that's kind of our position in this material world. So Krishna now wants us to see the bigger picture. He wants us to step back from our little lifetime, you know, which is a tiny little fraction of time, and see things from the bigger picture. So the verses 17 to 22 are doing that. By human calculation, this is 17. By human calculation, 1,000 ages taken together form the duration of one Brahma's day. I mean, just that is mind-blowing. Do you know one cycle of 4 yugas? We are currently in the Kali Yuga. Before that is the Dwapara Yuga, before that is the Treta Yuga, and before that is the Satya Yuga. If we take these 4 ages together, it's 4.32 million years. Just that one cycle. And one Brahma's day is 1,000 times that. That is 4.32 billion years. One day of Brahma. No? So from Brahma's point of view, it just likes one day. You get up in the morning, yeah, he runs the universe, and then, you know, after one day, then he goes to sleep. And he sleeps for 12 hours, just like, well, 8, 10, 12 hours, whatever. And then again, another day. And that is how like Brahma's life goes. 30 days, 1 month. 12 months, 1 year. 100 years, lifetime of Brahma's finished. So Krishna wants us to look, step back. You know, even in the current Kali Yuga, how many times can you take birth? If we live 100 years, how many times can you take birth? We knock 2 noughts off, no? If we take 4.32 billion and we knock off 2 noughts, we're left with 432,000. 43,000, I beg your pardon. That's how many times we can take birth in a single day of Brahma. And in every birth, it's the same thing. We come into this world, we go through so much trouble, you know, we have to do so many things we don't want to do, we get thumped by the material energy so much, then we die. Then we take birth in another body and we do the whole thing all over again. 43,000 times in one day of Brahma. So Krishna is trying to show us this is the nature of this material world. We just take birth over and over and over again. So Krishna wants us to see that. So in 18th verse, again and again, when Brahma's day arrives, all living beings come into existence. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. At the beginning of Brahma's day, all living entities become manifest from the unmanifest state. Because when Brahma goes to sleep, guess what? We all go to sleep because nothing is manifest at that time. And when Brahma rises the next morning in his day, then again, we're all manifest. It's called a partial devastation. So not only do we take birth many, many times in the day of Brahma, but then afterwards, when Brahma goes to sleep, we go into a situation of like hibernation, and we're held there until Brahma wakes up. And then again, we come into the material world and we do all our things. And thereafter, when night falls, they are merged into the unmanifest again. So not only we're taking birth over and over again, but they can become unmanifest. Then Lord Brahma wakes up and we become manifest again. And we go to our birth, death. Then again, we become unmanifest. This is how it's going on. Again and again, when Brahma's day arrives, all living entities come into being. And with the arrival of Brahma's night, they are helplessly annihilated. Because can you say, oh, my dear Brahma, please don't annihilate me. You can try, you can write to him. I don't know what the address is, but you could try. You know, like sometimes the children, they write to Santa. They address it to Santa Claus, North Pole. You know? Maybe we could write a letter like that. My dear Lord Brahma, and we address it to Satyaloka. And then we burn it in the fire. Maybe he'll get the letter. I don't know. You can ask him, you know, my dear Lord Brahma, please don't annihilate me when your day comes to the end. Will it be any use? Won't be any use, actually. Won't be any use, because there's billions and billions of them that go into hibernation when Lord Brahma's day finishes. So he probably doesn't have time to read all the letters. So this is Krishna giving the bigger picture. Why? To show us that, you know, why you want to keep doing this? Why do you want to keep doing it over and over again? Why do you want to keep being annihilated, you know, put into a state of hibernation, and then again being manifest? And this is going on lifetime after lifetime, not only our lifetime after lifetime, but also Brahma's lifetime after lifetime, being manifest and again being unmanifest. Thousands and thousands of births, unmanifest. Manifest, thousands of births. Krishna's like, what's wrong with you? You know, why don't you come back to the spiritual world where you belong? So Krishna's underlining this point here, attaining the supreme. Those who come to my abode, they never take birth again. By contrast, in the material world, thousands and thousands of births. Can you imagine all the suffering you're going to experience in thousands and thousands of births? Even in this one lifetime, it's a bit bewildering, all the suffering we've had in this one lifetime. So Krishna is making comparison here. Why do you want to stay in this material world? What's wrong with you? So now, to underline the point, we have these two verses, the next three verses actually. 20th verse, this is yesterday's verse, I assume. Yet there is another unmanifest nature, which is eternal and transcendental. To this manifest and unmanifest. In other words, that nature in the spiritual world is not manifest and unmanifest. It's there all the time. It never changes. It is supreme and is never annihilated like it is in this material world. When all in this world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. Krishna is giving repetition here. He wants you to make the comparison in your mind. Okay, become Krishna's devotee, think of him always, go back to the spiritual world, no more birth and death. Satchitananda, existence in the spiritual world, full of knowledge, full of eternality, and full of bliss. Now let's compare it with the material world. We know what our births are like, because we're experiencing one right now. Thousands and thousands in a day of Lord Brahma. Then you become manifest. Then again you become manifest in thousands and thousands of births. So Krishna wants you to make the comparison. What do you want? So I hope the choice is clear to you. I hope the choice is clear. So, okay, now we come to a kind of special description of that spiritual nature, which is today's verse. It's 21. It is 21. Isn't it 21 today? Yeah, okay. So now we chant the verse together. Avyakto kshara ityuktas.
Avyakto kshara ityuktas.
Tamahu padamam gatim.
Tam ahum paramam gatim.
Yam prapya na nivatante.
Yam prapyanam vartante.
Tattama padamam mama.
Tat dharma paramam mama.
So when Prabhupada gives the word for word meaning so that we can understand what each word means, and therefore we can enter deeply into the meaning of this is a really wonderful verse, actually. I want to enter deeply into this verse and understand it. Avyaktaha,
Avyaktaha,
unmanifested.
unmanifested.
Aksharaha,
Aksharaha,
infallible,
infallible.
because this world is fallible. Actually, it's full of fabinality. Everything here is temporary by nature. The spiritual world is not like that, actually. The spiritual world is infallible, but this world is fallible. Iti,
Iti,
thus,
thus,
Aduktaha,
taha,
said,
is said,
is said,
tam,
tam,
that,
that
ahu,
aho,
Ahuha
is known,
is
is
known,
known,
paramam,
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 the ultimate,
the
the
ultimate,
ultimate,
gatim,
gati,
Gatim,
destination,
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 yam,
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 which,
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 prapya,
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 gaining,
gain,
gaining,
na,
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 never,
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 nivatante,
nivartante,
Tande,
come back,
come
come
back,
back,
tat,
tat,
That,
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 dharma,
Dharma,
abode,
abode,
Oh,
kam,
paramam,
prem,
Supreme,
mama,
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 my.
my.
my,
Prabhupada takes these word for word meanings and renders the following translation. That which the Vedantists describe as unmanifest and infallible, that which is known as the supreme destination, that place from which, having attained it, one never returns. That is my supreme abode. This is such a wonderful verse, actually. Okay, you can repeat that which the Vedantists
That which the
that
Vedantists
which the Vedanta
describe as unmanifest
describes
as
as manifest
manifest
and infallible,
and
and infallible,
that which is known
that
that which is known
as the supreme destination,
as the supreme destination,
that place from which,
that
that
place
place
from
from
which,
which,
having attained it,
having
having
attained,
attained,
one never returns.
one
never
never
returns.
returns.
That is my supreme abode.
That is my supreme abode.
So my question is, who's speaking?
Krishna.
Krishna. So Krishna is describing here his supreme abode, but in a certain way. He's describing it from the point of view of the Vedantists. Now we could ask, who are the Vedantists? You see, Srila Vyasadeva has presented everything we need to know in the Veda. Now, it's presented especially in the age of Kali. Actually, in the unedited and fully presented Veda, there are 10 billion shlokas. 10 billion. I'll give you some sense of what that would look like if you gathered it together in a room. Are any of you familiar with the Bible? If you're familiar with the Bible, the book of the Christians, you can show me like this. Any of you familiar with the Bible?
No.
No one's familiar with the Bible. Okay. Vishal is. The Bible consists of about 60,000 verses, approximately. No? So if we compared the Bible to the Vedanta, the Bible is a book like the Bhagavad Gita. It's about this thick, 60,000 verses. So if we did it in terms of how many Bibles would it take to make that 10 billion shlokas, it would be 330,000 Bibles, 330,000 books like this. That is the Veda, the entirety of the Veda. No? But the thing is, in this age, no one can possibly enter into that. It's not possible. And therefore, Srila Vyasadeva has presented its essence. He edited and presented it in the 4 Vedas. You know, the Yajur, the Rig, the Atharva, and the Sama. These are the 4 Vedas. There's also some ancillary works as well. But all this knowledge that Vyasadeva has presented, the essence is called the Vedanta, because Veda means knowledge and Anta means the end. So Srila Vyasadeva has presented everything, and then in a few codes, just very compressed and very, very nicely presented, he's given all that knowledge in summary study. It is called the Vedanta. It is said that if you study this knowledge, actually, you will know everything about the Veda. So there is a group of sages called the Vedantists. They just study the Vedanta, nothing else actually. Because that Vedanta is like a compressed form. It's like, when you walk down the supermarket aisle, you find some in the shopping there in the aisle, if it's soap powders, you find some soap powder, you just need a teaspoon to do your whole wash because it's so concentrated. So the Vedanta is like that. It's very concentrated. So this group of people called the Vedanta, they study that, because it's the end of all knowledge. So Krishna is saying that which the Vedantists describe as unmanifest. Why is it unmanifest? Because we can't see, because we have material vision. It's not manifest to us. We can't see it here. It exists, but we can't access it from our viewpoint because our consciousness is material. And when the consciousness is material, it's hidden from us, actually. And infallible. It's described as infallible because there's nothing there which is false. No? When we're fallible, it means that we make mistakes. There's falsehood. But when we go to the spiritual world, there's nothing there which is infallible. Everything is pure, actually, and there's no touch of the material nature there. So this is a very impersonal understanding of the spiritual world, that which the Vedantists, they're generally impersonalists, actually. They generally just study, and they think the supreme is the Brahman. That's what they're thinking. So Krishna says that which the Vedantists describe as unmanifest and infallible, that which is known as the supreme destination, that place from which, having attained it, one never returns. Of course, there's variegatedness in that. It's not just like there's variegatedness here. What we see here is a reflection of the spiritual world. So therefore, there must be variegatedness in the spiritual world, and Prabhupada deals with that in the purport. But here, if we look at the verse strictly first, Lord Krishna here is underlining the point that he's made. We need to go there. That is our place, actually. In that place, there is no inebriety. There is no fallibility. That is a place where there is Sat, Chit, Ananda, where there is eternality, unending existence. There is full knowledge, full cognizance of everything we need to know. And there is Ananda, which is spiritual bliss, which is what we're looking for, actually. In this world, we're looking for pleasurable experiences. But the problem with this world is those pleasurable experiences do not endure. They stay for some time and they go away. So therefore, we are constantly looking for different experiences to try and give us pleasure, because that is our nature. Our deepest understanding of our nature is that we're eternal and we're pleasure-seeking. That is because that's what we really are. But in this world, you can't get that done. You can't get that bliss which we're looking for. But you can get it in the spiritual world. That should be our goal, actually. Because the pleasures that we find here, you may remember in 5th chapter, Krishna was saying that those pleasures have a beginning and an end, the pleasures of this world, and therefore a wise man does not delight in them. But rather the devotees are the real pleasure seekers, because they don't want some paltry pleasure which is here today and gone tomorrow. They want the real pleasure, which is never ending and ever increasing. So Krishna is describing here, he's comparing for us. Look, this is the nature of the spiritual world, that if you go there, you never return. And that place is infallible. That place is so wonderful, actually, you won't even believe the bliss which is available there. And you compare that with the material world. What do we find? Thousands and thousands of births. And what is going on? Just repeated birth and death, trying to search out pleasures in this material nature. And it's described like chewing the chewed. We're chewing it, and we're trying to squeeze some pleasure out of it, just like the sugarcane wallah. You see them in India, the sugarcane wallah. They take the piece of sugarcane and they feed it through their mangle. They turn the handle like that, and then the juice runs out and it comes into your glass like that. And then when they've done it, they fold the sugarcane in half, which had just been through the mangle, and they put it through again to try and squeeze every last drop of juice out of it. And then sometimes they even fold it again a third time. And again, they put it through the mangle. Why? They're trying to squeeze as much juice out of it as possible. But in the end, how much juice more can you squeeze out of it? You put it through the mangle 3-4 times, you can't get any more juice out of it. So that is something like what we're trying to do in this material world. trying to squeeze some juice out of an experience which we've had before. And we know that it's limited and temporary, but we do it again because we think maybe this time it will satisfy me, or because we don't know of any better. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is presenting to us, yes, there is an alternative to this. It is called the spiritual world. How to go there? All you've got to do is remember me always. I'm deviated from the path. Okay. This is the verse in the context of the rest of the chapter. Krishna here in this verse is underlining. He's telling us, look, I've described that abode in some previous verses. Now I just want to underline the point for you. The Vedantists describe as unmanifest and infallible, that spiritual world, which is known as the supreme destination. When you go there, you don't come back. That is the topmost destination. It's described as an underbuddhivardhanam. It's a place of ever-increasing bliss. Not like this place. This is a place of ever-decreasing happiness. That is a place of ever-increasing bliss. Krishna is trying to attract us. Okay, now the spiritual world has been described in an impersonal way in this verse. The Vedantists. The Vedantists are mostly impersonalists. So therefore, Prabhupada in the purport is going to give us some understanding of what it actually looks like and what goes on there. And to do that, he's going to cite a book called the Brahmasamita. So we're going to read now. This is a really wonderful purport, actually. Well, actually, all Prabhupada's purports are really wonderful. But this is so nice because it describes the spiritual world. So I'm reading. The supreme abode of the personality of Godhead Krishna is described in the Brahmasamita. The Brahmasamita, Samhita is a treatise, a philosophical treatise. And in this case, it is Lord Brahma who is giving it. Lord Brahma is the secondary creator of this universe. He is a person who's an engineer. I understand that because I used to be an engineer. When you're an engineer, what you do is you take things which other people have generated and you put them together in surprisingly wonderful ways, and you make new stuff out of that. That is what engineering is. You take a transistor, you take an integrated circuit, take some resistors, and you assemble them in a certain way, and it does a certain job. So that is engineering. So similarly, Lord Brahma is an engineer. Prabhupada often describes him like that. What he does is he takes the ingredients which Lord Krishna has created, the 24 elements of this material nature, and he manifests the variegatedness that we see in this world. So he's an engineer. He's a pretty amazing personality. Krishna sets up the framework of the house, and Lord Brahma does the interior decoration. You can look at it like that. No? So he's a pretty amazing personality. And actually, when he's first born, he doesn't really understand very much. It's just like when you were first born, did you understand anything? Not really, no? Somebody picked you up and you told them, hey, what are you doing? But it came out as, wah, like that. That's what happened to you. We're born into delusion, actually. Even Lord Brahma's born into delusion. But actually, you can hear the waves of the Garbhodaka ocean lapping like that, and it's going tapa, 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 like that. So he understands in this, okay, I've got to perform some tapasya. No, I've got to meditate like that. So then what happens is Krishna reveals all knowledge to him within the heart. And as a result of having got that knowledge, he knows what to do, how to be the secondary creator of this universe. But before he begins that process, he glorifies Lord Krishna in 100 chapters. We only have the 5th chapter. It's 62 verses. But there are actually 100 chapters in the original. And in this 5th chapter, Lord Brahma is explaining so many things about the spiritual world, about this material nature, the position of the demigods, the position of Lord Krishna, our position, our relationship with Krishna. So many things are discussed. So especially at the beginning of these verses, actually at the end of every stanza in this philosophical treatise, 5th chapter of the Brahmasamita, each stanza ends with Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. I worship this Govinda. Govinda means the pleasure giver to the cows and the senses. I worship this Govinda who's the primeval Lord, the original person, like that. I worship this personality. And then in the verses, he says so many things about what his understanding is that Krishna has revealed to him. So the first thing that he starts with is the nature of the spiritual world. And these are the verses which Prabhupada is going to quote in this purport. It's a really wonderful purport. So we're going to dive in and see what we can verses. The supreme abode of the personality of Godhead Krishna is described in the Brahmasamita as Chintamani Dham. This place is not like that. Chintamani Dham means touchstone. The nearest thing we can understand in this world, I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's a substance called the Philosopher's Stone. I don't know if you've heard of that. It was a big thing in the Middle Ages, actually. Everyone was looking for what they called the Philosopher's Stone. It was said that if you could make that Philosopher's Stone, if you touched any metal, it would turn into gold. So there were a lot of people in the Middle Ages who were trying to figure this thing out. It was said to be based on mercury. And if you could simply get the right combination of things, you'd be able to make this touchstone. And then you touch any metal and it would turn that metal into gold. So it gives you a clue as to what the touchstone of the spiritual world is like. Touchstone means you can touch it and you can ask for whatever you want. So this is the nature of the spiritual world. Chintamani Dham, that place where everything is made of touchstone. You can touch and you can ask whatever you want. Like that. All desires are fulfilled, because that's what a touchstone is. A touchstone fulfills your desires. So this place where Krishna resides, the spiritual world, that which is described as infallible and unmanifest. But if when we become spiritually purified, it becomes manifest to us. And what is that place like? It is made of touchstone. Touchstone fulfills desires. But the thing is, when you go there, you only have spiritual desires. When we go there, we don't have any material desires, because material desires are kind of a waste of time. You get something little and then it goes away. You get a little bit of pleasure and it goes away. So one who's spiritually inclined is not really interested in that anymore. They want the real deal. Excuse me. That supreme abode of Lord Krishna is known as Goloka Vrindavan. Vrindavan means a forest of Vrinda. Vrinda is Tulsi Devi. Tulsi Devi is a very special personality, but she's in the form of a plant. She's a pure devotee, but Krishna has arranged that she's come to this world to help us in our devotion. When we're staying in temple, we recite that prayer. We do a special arati to the Tulsi Devi in the morning, and we recite a special prayer about her. She's actually the giver of devotion. She's a very special personality, but in the form of a plant. She's a gopi from the spiritual world in the form of a plant. So she's very, very special. So this place, which is Vrindavan, a forest of Tulsi, because Tulsi is very dear to Krishna, actually. There's a whole story behind that. We haven't time to tell you today. But Krishna arranged for that, actually, so that she would come to this material world to help us with our devotion. So it's described that this place of Krishna is a forest of Tulsi. No? Can you imagine how? Because the Tulsi plant, she's a shrub, actually. She grows like a shrub. If she's very big, she might grow to maybe 2 or 3 feet tall and becomes a very bushy plant like that with lots of manjaris. Maybe a bit taller, 4 feet, if you've got a really big Tulsi plant. So this place, Goloka Vrindavan, is a forest of Vrinda, and she's a wish-fulfilling tree for devotion. And then also Goloka. Loka means planet, and Go means cow. So Krishna's place is the planet of the cows, because cows are very dear to Krishna, actually. In the spiritual world, actually, Krishna is just playing with the cows and the cowherd boys during the day, and during the night, he's meeting the gopis and they're having rasa dance. So this is what Krishna does in the spiritual world. He just enjoys pastimes of pure love with his devotees, and everybody is completely in love with Krishna. So this is an insight to the verses that Brahmasamita are giving this. Prabhupada is explaining. The supreme abode of Lord Krishna, known as Goloka Vrindavan, is full of palaces made of touchstone. What's your palace made of? They say, where I come from, they say that an Englishman's home is his castle. Some people, they want to make a home which is so wonderful, the demigods want to come and live in it. So they make a big palatial home. So what's your palace made of? It's bricks and mortar. I'm sorry to tell you that, You can try touching them and asking for your desires to be fulfilled, but I don't think that's going to happen so much, no? So your palace is made of bricks and mortar, but the palaces in the spiritual world are made of touchstone. You can just touch them and whatever desires you have will be fulfilled. We're not finished there, actually. There are also trees called desire trees, kalpa vrikshas. Actually, vriksha means tree. they fulfill you. You can ask the desired tree, okay, I'd like paneer butter masala with pakoras and curd cheese and corn samosas. And immediately it will be presented before you. And we'll have yogurt and mango nectar drink. And immediately it will come. They can fulfill any desire. If you've got a tree in your garden, you can try. You can kneel before the tree in the garden and say, my dear tree, please give me nectar drink made with mango juice and yogurt, and see what happens. Probably that tree will not be able to fulfill your desire. But the trees in the spiritual world are like that. So this Lord Brahma is telling these things. That's the first verse. Chintamani prakara sadma shukalpa vriksha. We just did the first line. Chintamani prakara sadma shukalpa vriksha. We just did the first line of the 29th stanza. That supply any type of eatable upon demand. And there are cows, known as Sarabi cows, Goloka, the place of the Sarabi cows, which supply a limitless supply of milk. The cows in this world, even the Frisians, they give like 7 or 8 liters and that's it. You have to wait then till the next morning to get more. And that's if you look after them nicely. But the Sarabi of the spiritual world, they give unlimited amount of milks. Because milk actually is a miracle food. I don't know if you know that. Srila Prabhupada says it's a miracle food for babies and old men. He says like that. Also, it's another place it's described as liquid religion. Milk is described as liquid religion. Why? Because it develops fine brain tissue so that we can understand spiritual subject matter. And in the spiritual world, there's always lots of yogurt and butter and milk, profuse supply. So for that, and cheese as well. My wife is saying curd cheese. So for that, you need a lot of cows. So the cows of the spiritual world, the Sarabi cows, they can give you any amount of milk, can also fulfill desires as well, whatever you want to know. In this abode, Lord Krishna is served by hundreds of thousands of goddesses of fortune. Lakshmi, Sahasra, Satasam, Brahmasamita, Mano. That's also a line from this first stanza where Lord Brahma is describing like that. Can you imagine being served by one goddess of fortune? Actually, that's what everybody in this world is hankering for. They want to worship Lakshmi Devi, isn't it? Why? Let's ask Kirtika. Kirtika, why they worship Lakshmi Devi?
For lots of wealth.
Lots of wealth. Yeah, but the thing is, if they don't, she's chanchala, The thing is, unless Narayan is there, she won't stay with you. You give her a little bit of wealth and she'll move on to somebody else. But everybody in this world is worshipping her, hoping they'll give, hoping she'll give them their desires. But Krishna is worshipped by Sahasra, thousands of them actually, hundreds of thousands of goddesses of fortune. So you can imagine the opulence of that place, this Goloka Vrindavan where Krishna is residing. Hundreds of thousands of goddesses of fortunes, Lakshmis, and he is called Govinda. Govinda means the one who gives pleasure to the cows and the senses. Actually, not our material senses, but our spiritual senses. Krishna is the reservoir of all pleasure. He's described like that. When we chant Hare Krishna, and then we come to Hare Rama, Rama means the person who is the reservoir of all pleasure. Whatever pleasure we're seeking, Krishna in the form of Rama is that pleasure, actually. He's the source of all rasas. And through rasas, we get pleasure. Isn't it? We enjoy life through exchanges, different kinds of exchanges, passive adoration, master-servant, friendship, parenthood, conjugal love. This is how we enjoy. But here, the thing is the relationships are not perfect. They're full of inebriety of different kinds. But in the spiritual world, Krishna reciprocates perfect relationship in those ways. Govinda, satisfying everybody, the cows and also the spiritual senses. The primeval Lord and the cause of all causes. Why Prabhupada says that? Because the last line of this stanza, Govinda Mari Padasham Tamaham Vajami, because that is Lord Brahma's position actually. He's the worshipper of this Govinda, who is the one who is the supreme controller and the source of everything. The Lord, the cause of all causes. Actually, the beginning of the treatise, at the beginning of this 5th chapter, we've only got the 5th chapter. There are 100 chapters. but we've only got the 5th chapter. At the beginning of the 5th chapter, Lord Brahma says, Ishvara Parama Krishna, Satchitananda Vigraha, Anadi Adi Govinda, Savakarana Karanam. Savakarana Karanam means the cause of all causes. Anadi, he's without beginning. Anadi Adi Govinda, but actually he's the source of everything. So this is Krishna, described by Lord Brahma. Prabhupada is paraphrasing at the end here. He's saying, the Lord is, sorry, I missed. He is called Govinda, the primeval Lord and the cause of all causes. Adi Purisham, the original person, the primeval person and the cause of all causes. So we get some insight here. There's more in the next few lines as well. Actually, what we're going to get now is the next verse. That's the next verse. We just did the 29th. This is the 30th verse where Prabhupada's describing from now. The Lord is accustomed to blow on his flute. Venam Kvadantam. Actually, the Lord is characterized, Krishna is characterized by certain things. Like he carries a flute. He's got a peacock feather in his turban, which is just arranged at a slant like that. He wears a beautiful, bright-colored yellow dhoti, silk dhoti, like that. Well, it's not really silk. It's made of some substance which we've never heard of in the cloth shops in this material world. It's a very special substance that it's made of. Beautiful saffron yellow color, like that. And then also he blows on his flute, and he has a peacock feather. These things are described in this verse. His transcendental form is the most attractive in all the 3 worlds. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, is adept at playing on his flute, with blooming eyes like lotus petals, head bedecked with peacock's feather, with a figure of beauty tinged with the hue of blue cows, and his unique loveliness charming millions of cupids. I've just read you the translation of that verse. In this world, everyone is enamored by Cupid, isn't it? If Cupid shoots his arrow at you, what happens? It's called
Fall in love.
Yes, you fall in love. You know what Srila Prabhupada says about that? He says if you're shot by Cupid's arrow, even if the girl is very ugly, you'll think she's very beautiful. That's what Prabhupada says. So in other words, Cupid is the controller of this world, you know, in the sense that everybody is looking for that relationship with the opposite person like that. So this Cupid is controlling everyone in this material world. Actually, in that spiritual world, the loveliness of Sri Krishna charms millions of Cupids. It's a poetic device to try and help us understand the exquisite and all-consuming beauty of Lord Krishna. That is what's available in the spiritual world. Okay, where are we? His transcendental form is the most attractive in all the worlds, spiritual and material. His eyes like lotus petals. I just read you the translation. The color of his body is like the color of clouds. It's said to be the color of a fresh monsoon cloud. It's a kind of blue-gray color, blue-gray like that. You see that in India. When the monsoon clouds gather, you see that color actually. Looks a little different to every devotee, but it's described like that, bluish, this bluish tinge. He is so attractive that his beauty excels that of thousands of cupids. Krishna is, can you imagine that? The beauty of one cupid in this world controls everybody. But Krishna, the beauty is so much that the beauty excels thousands and thousands of cupids. Just to give you some idea of Krishna's beauty. He wears saffron cloth, a garland around his neck, and a peacock feather in his hair. He always wears because he's a coward boy. In Goloka Vrindavan, Krishna is not the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's just a cowherd boy, and everybody loves him so much, actually, because he's so attractive. So therefore, he has a garland of forest flowers around his neck and a peacock feather in his turban, just placed at a slant. It's not straight up and down. It's usually a slant. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna gives only a small hint of his personal abode, Goloka Vrindavan. This verse that we're reading is a small hint. In the 15th chapter, he says it's not illuminated by the light of the sun or the moon or electricity or fire. Krishna gives some hints in the Bhagavad Gita. If we want to know more, we have to look in other places, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, especially in Brahmasamita, which is why Prabhupada is quoting these verses. Excuse me. It's personal verb, which is the supermost planet in the spiritual kingdom, because there are other planets in the spiritual kingdom as well. They're called Vaikuntha Lokas. In those Vaikuntha Lokas, Vaikuntha means a place where there's no anxiety. In those Vaikuntha Lokas, Krishna is worshipped in his four-armed form by devotees who are mostly in awe and reverence. There, everyone knows that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he manifests as Narayan with four arms, and everybody there is worshipping in awe and reverence. So out of all those planets, then there's also Dwarka, where Krishna is in his majestic form. Then there's Ayodhya, where a place where you just get the tinge of friendship. Then there's Mathura, and then finally there's Goloka Vrindavan, which is the topmost planet. So there are many planets in the spiritual nature. A vivid description is given in the Brahma Samhita. So if you like, I send you away to read this book. It's a beautiful description, actually, is there. We just quoted some things from a couple of verses, but a very wonderful description. It is said at the end of this 5th chapter, actually, which we're studying now, this 5th chapter where we've given, Prabhupada is discussing 2 verses. At the end of that 5th chapter, it says that in the spiritual world, every word is a song and every step is a dance. So it gives you some clue. So I'm telling you this in the hope that you'll want to run away now and read the Brahma Samhita to get that description of the spiritual world. Because if we see that description, actually, and we see what Lord Krishna has told us in these verses from 17 onwards about the nature of this material world, why on earth we want to stay here? Because in this place, you just repeated birth and death. In that spiritual world, there's none of that. And having gone there, you never return to this manifest and unmanifest material nature. And there, what's available? Sat Chit Ananda. Eternality without separation, full knowledge, cognizance of everything, and ever-increasing spiritual bliss. So Krishna is presenting us a choice. What do you want? This is why this chapter is called Attaining the Supreme. What do you want? Do you want this material world, which is full of inebriety and repeated birth and death? Or do you want this spiritual world? What do you want? Okay, a little bit left in the purport. We'll try and finish. The Vedic literatures like Katra Upanishad state that there is nothing superior to the abode of the Supreme Godhead, and that abode is the ultimate destination. Purusham na param kinchit sa kasta paramakati. When one attains to it, he never returns to the material world. Prabhupada is citing another scripture so that we get the idea. The Upanishads are very authoritative. They are the sum and substance of the Veda, the Upanishads. And Prabhupada is quoting from the most important, the Katra Upanishad, where the same thing is being said. And that abode is the ultimate destination, that there is nothing superior to that abode, the Supreme Personality of God, and the ultimate destination. Prabhupada is quoting from another source to support what he's saying. When one attains to it, he never returns to the material world. Krishna's supreme abode and Krishna himself are non-different, being of the same quality. On this earth, Vrindavan, 90 miles southeast of Delhi, is a replica of that supreme Goloka Vrindavan located in the spiritual kind. It's like an embassy. It's like right now I'm in South Africa, but if I walk into the British consulate in Cape Town, it's a bit like England. They have a picture of the Queen. Maybe some of the people talk with an English accent. It's actually a bit of England. You're no longer in South Africa. So similarly, the Goloka Vrindavan, which is on this earth, the Vrindavan which we find on this earth, it's called Bhumi Vrindavan. That Vrindavan which is manifest on this planet, on this material planet, that is like an embassy of the spiritual world. Krishna appeared there 5,000 years ago and performed his pastimes. It's a very special place. If you can, try and go there before you leave this body. And when you go there, try and remember Krishna and go and see all the deities of Krishna you'll find there. When Krishna descended on this earth, he sported on that particular tract of land known as Vrindavan, comprising about 84 square miles in the district of Mathura, India. So Krishna is encouraging us to think about that place where Krishna sported. We can go there, actually. We can read about his pastimes, we can go there and we can remember. So this is Krishna's supreme abode. So my question to you is, are you convinced? This is what Krishna is presenting here. What do you want? Repeated birth and death in this world, material world, or do you want my supreme abode? Attaining the supreme. This is what this chapter is about. So there's one question I can see on the chat. It's Vishal. I'm used to Vishal asking questions. He usually does.
Prabhuji, I have a list of questions, so maybe we can take Vishal's question and then I can.
Okay, can I do this one first then, or what?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Can devotion to Krishna, Krishna consciousness, not allow us to experience the awareness of permanent bliss, Satchidananda, in this very life and this material world? Yes, it can be done, because after all, everything is Krishna's energy. So when we become fully Krishna conscious, it doesn't matter where we are. We can be in hell or in heaven or on the planets of the demigods or in the spiritual world. It doesn't matter, because then we see Krishna everywhere. So yes, one can do that actually. One can be in that consciousness. But Prabhupada also says we should want to go back to the spiritual world. We should want that actually. I appreciate that there are limited, so I appreciate that we are limited by the 5 elements in this material nature, not just the 5, the 24 actually. It's just that we experience so much the 5, but actually there are 24 in this material. But can we not go beyond these through bhakti and increasing our awareness? Not oneness actually, in the sense, but actually Krishna's personal form. Through bhakti, it isn't just oneness we get. That is just the preliminary understanding of what is spiritual, just the preliminary understanding that everything is spirit. But actually by practicing bhakti properly, according to the process which Srila Prabhupada has discussed with us in his books, we can actually come to that platform in this lifetime, where you actually see Krishna's activities in the heart. Prabhupada says like transcendental television. So yes, one can come to that platform by practicing the process of Krishna consciousness. Is that all right, Vishal?
Yeah, thank you very much, Hare Krishna. Yeah, it's just the confusion was between manifest and unmanifest, because obviously everything's manifest here.
Yes,
could we get to that unmanifest state? Then
the spiritual world is unmanifest because we have material vision. So when the Vedantists describe it like that, they say it's unmanifest to us. They don't mean it's not manifest at all. They mean it's not manifest to us because we have material vision. So therefore it's not manifest to us. But if we can develop our devotion and develop spiritual vision, then it becomes manifest. So the Vedantists are describing from the point of view of the those who are in this material world. It's like, I see there's a window behind you. If you get up and look out the window, can you see the spiritual world?
No.
What do you see if you look out the window?
Houses. Material.
Cars.
Material world.
Yes, material world. So therefore the Vedantists describe it as unmanifest because we can't see it because we don't have the vision. But if we develop the vision, we can see it. Is that all right?
Yeah, Hare Krishna, thank you.
Thanks, Vishal. You asked such nice questions, Vishal. Thank you very much. So there's more. Kirtika?
Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. The other questions are, in other planets, what is our form when we are in the other planets? And then the same question in the various yugas. So if we were in the Satyug, what would we be like? So let's look at the first.
What would our form be? Yeah, sure. You see, the Veda describes there are 8,400,000 species of life, and mostly they're animals. You know, there's I don't remember the figures off the top of my head, not all of them. There's 3 million beasts, for instance. I think it's 1.1 million insects and reptiles. 2 million plants, isn't it? 2 million species of plants. If you add them all up, it comes to 8,400,000. Of those, only 400,000 are human form. So for instance, in the higher planetary systems, like if you went to Indraloka, or you went to Suryaloka, or you went to Brahmaloka, they would be human form. 2 arms, 2 legs, like we have, you know, human form. Some of them have more, like some of the demigods we see have more arms. 4 arms they have. Or for instance, if you mess with Durga, she might manifest her 10 arms, you know, so they have more. So it's generally speaking, it's a human form in the higher planetary systems. You know? And in different ages also, you know, we could be in the lower forms of animal life and what have you. But if we're in human form, in previous ages will also be human form. But for instance, in the Dwapara Yuga, in this Yuga, we find that the average human being doesn't really grow much above 6 feet, about 180, something like that, But in the Dwapara Yuga, the humans were bigger. I mean, I've heard figures like 10, 11, 12 feet tall. They were bigger. And in the Satya Yuga, even in the Treta Yuga and in the Dwapara Yuga, even bigger. Because everything diminishes. But the same form, basically, human form, 2 arms, 2 legs. So I don't know who the questioner was, but is this okay for whoever the questioner was?
Ravi Prabhuji, is that okay? I think we
may have lost him.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Let's move on then.
Question. And then we discussed about Swarg, and then they came up with Bilas Swarg. And Bilas Swarg is a place where there is a lot of opulence, but it is not in the spiritual.
Not in the spiritual world. Yeah, because there are places in this world, which are in this universe, which are much more opulent than we have here. They're described as the Swarga Loka or the Visarga Loka. They mean the heavenly planets. The place there, it's like it's reward for those who are following the rules and regulations and being pious. It's a reward for that. You get a better birth. But the problem with that is you have to come back after some time. But in those places, the material enjoyment is much, much greater than we find here. Much greater. It's described as thousands of times greater. It's a really wonderful place to go, but it's a bit like going on holiday. What's the problem with going on holiday?
You have to come back.
Yes, you have to come back. So that is the problem with it. Very nice enjoyment, but the problem is you have to come back. And then, this is why Krishna has said in the few verses before the one we studied today, that right up to the Brahmaloka planet, it is only repeated birth and death. So it's true, the enjoyment there is wonderful, but it's also short-lived. It may be a few thousand years, but in the scheme of things, it's also a very short space of time. Then you have to come back. And again, there are so many problems then. You have to come back. Is that all right for the questioner?
Yes, Prabhuji, thank you very much. So then there was a question about, so there are millions and millions of universes and millions and millions of Brahmalok. So in all the different universes, it's the same Kali Yuga, Satya Yuga, and Treta, and everything is repeating in all those universes.
Yes.
So, and it's at different times. So right now we are in Kali Yuga, whatever 1,000 year we are right now. But in another universe, we could be in Satyug, we could be in
Treta. Or in Treta Yuga or in Dwapara Yuga. The difference is some of the universes are smaller, some of the universes are bigger. It's actually mentioned by Srila Prabhupada that this is the smallest universe, because we see it's Chaturmukha Brahma, no? 4 faces. No? So it's actually the smallest universe we're in. There are some universes where Lord Brahma has 100 heads. Some where Lord Brahma has 1,000. There are some universes where Lord Brahma has 10,000 heads. And so it goes on. So it's kind of mind-blowing. We're in the smallest universe. But yes, the basic structure is the same things are going on.
But in no 2 universes there is the same thing going on.
No, because obviously a little different. Even Krishna's pastimes have little differences. There's some, it's done in this way or it's done in the same basic pastime is there, but there are differences in the way that it's enacted. Yeah, so nothing exactly the same anywhere.
This gives realization of the parallel universe that that was talked about 15, 20 years ago. That
they still talk about it, actually. In string theory, it's still talked about.
So that is what we are coming. The next question is on string theory and how it fits into our concept.
You see, this is an attempt by the materialists to...
Shymanand, can I interrupt you for once?
Yes, of course, Mother Manik Siganga, you can always...
This question about what sort of pastime is going on, it just struck me. I kind of heard Srila Prabhupada. It's like a road show. You're winding up in one place and they've set it already up in another place. So it's an ongoing road show from one universe to the other, right?
Very nice way of describing it.
Because road shows are very much British thing. So you explain the details.
Yeah, roadshow. This means you go from place to place. You know, roadshow means you set up your concert in one place, you do your concert, then you go to another place, and you set it up there and do it there. So Krishna is constantly traveling like that, constantly traveling the universes, showing his original transcendental form. Like Krishna says that in Bhagavad Gita, no? You should think of me in my original transcendental form. Krishna says, you know, I come to this material universe in my original transcendental form. So Krishna's roadshow is going on. And there's a universe right now where this 21st verse of the 8th chapter is spoken by Krishna. It's in one universe somewhere. It's just going on in one universe somewhere. Krishna's traveling roadshow. It's a very nice point that Mother Manasiganga is making. Is that all right, Manasiganga?
Yes, another point I remember also, that when we leave this body, we're supposed to enter in one of those pastimes that's taking place in this kind of material
Traveling roadshow.
planet before we qualify to go back to the spiritual world. Am I right?
Yes, you're correct. Yeah, when we're almost pure, when we're almost ready to return to the spiritual world, we appear in Krishna's pastimes in the material world where he's enacting his past in one universe where he's enacting his pastimes, so that we can get a chance to just drive away those last remnants of impurity. And then we return to the spiritual world. It's like a dress rehearsal, if you like, for the spiritual world, just to wipe off those last few remnants of impurity. Another very nice point that Mother Manasiganga is making. Thank you, Mother Manasiganga. So what was that thing about string theory? Let's return.
Yes, Prabhuji, before we go to string theory, maybe I can ask this question because it's directly related. So we are now, when we are enacting the play, the rehearsal, and then we go to the spiritual world. And what do we do there in the spiritual world?
That will depend on our particular exchange with Krishna. Actually, we all have an eternal exchange with Krishna. And actually, not so much in the Shantaras. Devotees are not really so much interested in passive adoration. They want an exchange with Krishna. And therefore, it'll be in either master-servant, that's predominating in the Vaikuntha planets. In other words, would it be wonderful to have the perfect master who just deals with you in exactly the right way and fulfills all your desires and just deals with you so nicely? So some devotees want that. Some devotees actually want the exchange of friendship, where Krishna is, they forget that Krishna is the Supreme Lord and they get an equal exchange. Some want the Lord to be their child and have a perfect exchange like that. And some want the perfect lover. Krishna is the perfect lover. So according to our eternal position, we have one of those rasas, and it exists already. And as we uncover our consciousness, when we come to a very high stage of Krishna consciousness called bhava, almost completely pure at that stage, then we begin to get realization about what that universal, what that eternal exchange with Krishna is. One of those exchanges, either passive, either master-servant, friendship, parenthood, or conjugal ras. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
Yes, Prabhuji, I think you have answered the question. Okay, then we go back to the string theory question about the parallel universe. And
you see, the materialists are always trying to do this, trying to find out more and more and more. That is called anumana, following the mind, trying to find out things. So you see, they've come up with a fact. One way we can understand this, there are places in the Himalayas you can go, and if you have access to a higher dimension, you'll find that the Gandharvas are playing there in a lake. And they're swimming with their ladies and there are lotuses. But if you go there, you'll just see mountains and rocks and snow and all that kind of thing. Because there are different dimensions available if your consciousness is high enough to receive them. So all this stuff about string theory is an attempt by the materialists to postulate different levels or different dimensions within the same physical space. And, it's kind of interesting if you're into those kinds of things, but the problem with this kind of analysis is that it always ends in mystery. Because the material nature, as Krishna has described, is endlessly mutable, and therefore you can never come to the end of it. And we see, therefore, that the scientists never really reach a firm conclusion. Somebody else comes along and says something else, and then they speculate some more and they come up with a new theory. And then, that stays for some time. And then somebody else comes along with something and they get a new theory. It's like a good example of that is when in the Middle Ages, when they looked at the sun, they thought this is burning. So it must be made of a fuel. So they postulated the sun must be made of coal. That stuff you buy from I don't know where you buy yours from, but you buy it and you put it in the fire and it burns. So they said the sun must be made of coal. That's because it's the most advanced fuel they knew about at that time. But the problem is someone came along later and said, well, there's another fuel which burns hotter. So this is the problem with this anumana, this philosophical speculation. You never come to the end of it. And it never reveals the supreme truth. Because Krishna says, I'm only revealed by devotion. So the string theory is some attempt by the materialists to postulate the existence of parallel universes in the same physical space. But it's when you come to the end of it, it's just anumana. Somebody else will come along and say, no, it's not like that. And then again, it will change. And again, it will change. And so it will go on. Is that all right?
Okay, Prabhuji, I'll convey this answer to the...
Hare Krishna, can I interrupt on that question? It's Vishal here, sorry. Prabhuji, does time exist in the spiritual world? Because all these theories are a construct of time. So when time disappears, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. We all have Krishna here and now in the present.
Yes, there's no time in the spiritual world. Do you know why?
You don't age over there.
No, there's no time because everyone there is so absorbed in their relationship with Krishna. There's no room for past or present.
Yeah.
No room because everyone is fully absorbed, completely absorbed in their relationship with Krishna. And therefore there is no question of past and future.
That's where we attain, if we attain Krishna here and now, then we forget our past future continuum and we're in that present bliss, which is what it says in the Bible, what Jesus said, this is the doorway to God, is the present.
Sure, the present.
We're trapped in a past future continuum.
Yes, mostly
which is led by time.
And, mostly our consciousness is either past or future. Mostly our consciousness is not in the present. But when you're transcendental, when you develop transcendental consciousness, then your consciousness is completely in the present. And why? Because you're engaged with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in a perfect exchange of transcendental bliss. And therefore the past and the future disappear because that's all material. It's a nice point, Vishal. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So you have a linear relationship and not a cyclic thing.
When you say a linear relationship, what do you mean?
So when it's cycle, it's birth, then you become a youth, and then you become old, and then you die. And then
that's material.
That's cycling. But when
but linear also implies time, because linear means you start at one point and you go on and you come to another point. But in the spiritual world, that is not present.
It's just 2 points, and that's where they
not
are.
even 2 points.
No.
Just one.
Just one.
The present, being in the present.
Just your relationship with Krishna. Nothing else. Nothing. That is why we say time is not present in the spiritual world. There's no concept of time. There's no need for it because no one's worrying about the past or the future. Everyone is completely absorbed in their relationship with Krishna. Is that all right, Kirtika?
Yes, Prabhuji. I think there are 2 or 3 more questions, but they are not related to this, so that's why I left them at the end.
Okay,
So
Manasi wants to say
somebody
something.
asked me.
Manasi Ganga, you want to interject?
I just want, on the same point of spiritual world being conspicuous by its absence. And I mean, I'm sure everyone has tasted it. When you're so busy with service, Janmashtami or any festival, where do you have the concept of time then? You're just happy and serving and trying to finish a target. You definitely off the concept of time at that. So Krishna gives us little taste here itself, how it can be existing in the spiritual world with no concept of time. Initially, I had to find it very tough.
Such a nice realization. Thank you so much for sharing it. And you know, even if we're not so practiced, if we become absorbed in service or listening about Krishna's pastimes, what Manasi Ganga is saying is true. Time stops, actually, it disappears. It's a very nice point she's making. Yeah. Thank you, Manasi Ganga. You always make such nice points.
Yeah, I think that leads to the next question, which is, she's asking, how do we spiritualize washing dishes? So when I'm washing dishes, should I be chanting Krishna, or should I have that power that I'm doing this in service for Krishna? I'm washing these dishes so I can use them again for Krishna, or because Krishna
Yes,
is
exactly.
eating. So,
yeah, you see, when we're washing dishes, like Krishna said, you know, we should do our duty and think of him. So when we're washing dishes, it's not so spiritual, actually, generally, unless it's Krishna's dishes, or we're feeding Krishna's devotees. But if it's not like that, then at least we can do our duty and think of Krishna. So we can always find a way to spiritualize. I mean, it may be that you're washing the plates of the devotees, in which case that's transcendental service. Or, you know, washing the pots which you use to cook for Krishna. So that can be directly spiritual. But if it's just duty, something we have to do, then we can think of Krishna.
So she's asking, how do we think of Krishna? Should I be chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra, or should I say that this is a service I'm doing for Krishna?
It could be both. It could be both. You know, the trick is to always find a way to somehow or other either think of Krishna or connect it. Connect what we're doing with Krishna or think of Krishna. And the best way to think of Krishna is to hear his pastimes or chant his holy name. These are the two most powerful ways. So yes, if it's a mundane activity, you've got to do it anyway because it's your duty, then think of Krishna or chant Krishna's holy name. Remember some of Krishna's activities that you've heard or chant Krishna's name. My wife's saying something. 1 minute. Yeah, it can be like that. My wife is saying if you're washing dishes, it's because you're cooking for Krishna or cooking for Krishna's devotees or cooking for people you want to turn into Krishna's devotees. You know, we have to be very expert at just tuning our consciousness, how we can connect it with Lord Krishna. And if we find we can't, then chant Krishna's name or remember Krishna's pastimes. Is it all right?
Yes, Prabhu, thank you. And the last question is, yes, he understands that the consciousness is and the soul are different, but he cannot explain it. He wants to know, how do you explain
They're
the
not
soul
different.
and conscious?
Actually, they're not different. Consciousness is the symptom of the soul. You know, if you have a table in your front room, you can tap it and see if it objects, if it tells you why you're tapping me. The material nature is not conscious. It has no self-awareness. So the symptom of the soul is self-awareness or consciousness. So it's not that the two are different. Consciousness is the symptom of the soul. It is, you know, it is intimately connected with the soul. If there's soul, there must be consciousness. If there's soul, there must be desire. There must be pleasure-seeking nature. There must be eternality. There must be the concept that we're eternal servant of Krishna. There must be the concept of self-awareness, that I am pure spirit soul. So it's not separate. It is actually the same thing. The consciousness is the symptom of the soul. Is that all right?
So, Prabhuji, when I explained it that way, I was asked that when you make anybody unconscious, like when you go for an operation at that time, you are made unconscious. So the nerve impulse is not traveling, and therefore
They're not traveling to the
he doesn't feel pain. At that time, the soul is still existing, but you are unconscious. So how do I explain it then?
So you see, when we're in our material body and we're very much conscious of consciousness flowing in the material, then the soul is in a kind of suspended state because we have no in order for the soul to be manifest fully, there must be a relationship with Krishna. So when we're in this material world and our consciousness flows through the material body and the material senses, we are not conscious of Krishna. And therefore the soul is kind of in a suspended state. But as we develop the relationship more and more, then the soul comes into play. The consciousness of the soul comes into play more and more. But at the moment, our consciousness is flowing through the material. It's a bit like you have a light bulb. You take a red filter and you put it over the light bulb, then the light appears red. No, so it's like that. Our consciousness is flowing in the material, and therefore the original consciousness of the spirit soul is not manifest for that reason, because it's not. We don't have the relationship with Krishna. So that in that way, and then the instrument through which the consciousness is flowing is the material body. And when we inject, something like anesthetic or something like that, then because our consciousness and spiritual hasn't developed, the consciousness stops flowing because we only know to spread it through the material body. And therefore the instrument to thread it through the material body, the mind and intelligence and false ego, when we inject like that, then it becomes disconnected from the material body, and therefore we don't have that consciousness. But it doesn't mean that the consciousness of the soul has stopped. Consciousness of the soul is still there, but it's held in suspended animation because we don't have a relationship with Krishna. Well, that's one way of looking at it. Does that help?
I'll have to think and synthesize it properly.
It's not an easy thing to explain because we don't really have this concept of our original consciousness. We just have the material consciousness concept, and therefore trying to explain it to someone is very difficult, actually, to try and get them to understand that, okay, the soul is not conscious when you inject an anesthetic into my body. No, the soul is always conscious. It's just that it's not manifest because we don't have the relationship with Krishna. So therefore it's kind of like hibernation. The soul is in a hibernation state because the consciousness is flowing through the body.
So that brings me now that I've started thinking that we all are in an unconscious state right now when we have no relationship with Krishna.
With Krishna, yeah. It's not our original consciousness. It's a false consciousness, a false ego, a false identification. And therefore we think it's real because we don't have the other one.
Okay.
But as my wife is saying, when we chant the holy name, it awakens that consciousness. It dissolves the subtle body and it awakens that consciousness. But of course, it's like anything, it takes time. You have to practice it. Our consciousness of Krishna. When we first start chanting, we're not so much conscious of Krishna. But the chanting can lead you to a place where you're fully conscious of Krishna. It's simply a question of practice.
Okay. I'm sorry I've really gone on and on.
We've really
Taken
gone
half
over
an hour more of your time, Prabhuji. I'm really, really sorry. Thank you very much for sharing all the answers. But this is a whole week's work, and we had lots of questions and a lot of debates over this week. Okay, so let's unmute and chant the Hare Krishna Maha mantra to glorify Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Krishna,
Krishna, Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare.
Hare
Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Shymanand Krishna Das Prabhuji ki jai.
Jai.
Salveda Bhaktivinoda ki
Jai.
Jai.
Vanchakalpatarubhyasya
Vanchakalpatarubhyasya kirpa sindhavye vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha.
Hare Krishna. Thank you all for staying with us. And I'm really sorry that we went on another half an hour.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I'm ending the session. Hare Krishna.